Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and today I want to introduce you to my top 5 winter bank fishing baits. Doesn't that sound like a lie? Because it is. This top 4, top 5, top 10 category is so asinine, it drives me insane. What it should really be is 5 suggested baits for winter bank fishing or 5 suggested baits for the spring, because there really is no top 5. And let me prove this to you right now. Let's say you fish on a pond out on some farm property that's only got bluegills, bass, and crawdads. So when somebody's telling you a top 5 baits and they have threadfin shad or gizzard shad in their lake, do you really think that relates to you? Absolutely not. Bass lures are tools. They have application purpose, and then they have a reaction purpose, how you move them in, the cadence purpose, and then they have a matching the hatch purpose. So that's where you can use it. Can you throw it in grass? Can you throw it in rocks? What does it actually do? Does it vibrate? Does it dive? Does it dart back and forth on the surface? And then does it actually look like the forage you're fishing around? So how in the world can my top 5 baits be your top 5 baits? They can't. So what I want to explain to you today is a variety of baits that you can choose, and you could tie on any 3 of these, any 5 of these, but I want to explain to you how you can go about using them on any particular body of water that you're fishing, and how it may benefit you to change it up, or just listen to my perspective on this and then really think about how that applies to your water or the area that you fish. Now, right away off the bat, your bank fishing. This is for bank fishing. I'm gonna give some bank fishing tips. It's been a while since I shared this for people. A lot of this you can use off a boat too, but I'm gonna focus on you bank guys. I think this is a good time of year to really help you guys out, because bank fishing in the wintertime can be a struggle, and I'm going to explain this real quick here. And why do I think it can be a bigger struggle than any other time of year? Middle of the summer, middle of winter, summertime, a lot of the bass go into real heavy cover. So if you're bank fishing, you could throw a frog, you can flip around this stuff. Wintertime, they typically don't have heavy cover to pull into. They're either going to pull down on deeper rocks or the deepest part of your pond or in a creek channel, or they're going to suspend. And the thing is, they tend to school up when they do this in the winter. And you oftentimes have to fish slower or more methodical to trick these fish. So therefore, these fish that you were fishing for in this area now may be all concentrated to this spot and this spot. And you need to be able to find them while fishing very slow and methodical at the same time. So how do we go about doing this? So the number one thing I want to tell you, if you are bank fishing, is you're gonna have to walk a lot of shoreline. Carry 2 rods. I would suggest the Sticks number 2 and the Sticks number 3. Those are the hybrid rods. If not, carry whatever you want. Get a backpack, carry 2 plain old boxes in your backpack or whatever box you got, and I want you to kind of bring a variety of these baits that I'm going to go over with you. Don't overcomplicate it. If you bring too many rods, it's going to be difficult. You're going to want to cover less water, therefore you're decreasing your odds of finding these fish. So I'm going to start off with reaction baits. Everybody knows in the wintertime, jerk baits work really well. Now let's say you're in a pond that doesn't have crappie, doesn't have shad, no shiny bait fish. Do these apply to you? Well, this one's got a green kind of hue to it. That may look like a bluegill, but let's say your water's muddy and there is no shiny bait fish. Neither one of these jerk baits apply for you. You would want something more green pumpkin, something more brim pattern, a more solid color if your water's a little bit more stained. So you can see right away, this may be in my top 5 and not in yours. And another thing you're gonna notice right here. Now, I said they oftentimes suspend or they oftentimes hold to the bottom. Well, let's say you're fishing a 5-foot deep cove and there's a little 8-foot deep creek channel. This guy only gets down about 4 to 5 feet, but this guy can get all the way down and almost touch the bottom. This is a Stacy 90, that's a Pointer 78. Completely different style right here. Let's say the fish are suspended on shad that are starting to die off. You see seagulls flying around, or it's later in the winter time and you know those bait fish are down near the bottom, and you're fishing that deeper water, this is not going to apply to you. But if you're fishing a real shallow pond that does have like crappie or shad in it, this is going to outfish this. So I want you to really keep this in mind, guys. When we are searching for these fish, I would say in the wintertime, they're either looking forward or they're looking down or they're feeding off of the bottom. Rarely ever are they looking up in the wintertime. And what I mean by that is there's different areas of the water column that you're fishing. Now, outside of winter, I would say surface applies, but let's just think about 3 or 4 foot down, looking forward, fish that are suspended, looking forward or looking down, and then the fish that are solely targeting things off the bottom like crawdads, salamanders, you name it, anything down there on the bottom, gobies. So now, let's think about this. Most likely, if you're fishing a shallow pond, you may be able to keep that over the grass. If there's grass in your pond, you are standing shallow, or your lake. You're standing on the bank. Chances are there's a couple inches of water in front of you, unless it's a deep rocky lake. So therefore, if you're casting shallow, it may be very hard to bring that back, that deeper diving jerkbait. But if you're fishing deeper rocks, it'll be a lot easier to bring this back, where this one is probably going to be better around those shallower ponds, shallower water, just above the grass. So we're going to throw the jerkbaits out there, and I want you to focus on making longer cast in the winter. We do have to cover that water in the beginning. Remember, the longer the pause, the better it is for you. But, you know, when you first start, twitch, count to 3, twitch, twitch, count to 5, twitch, count to 5, twitch, twitch, count to 10. That is not a very long pause, but once you dial in and you do catch a fish in that spot, take longer pause at that point, because chances are they are schooled up and you may catch additional ones. I know some people say pause up to a minute. If you're trying to find the fish that is not to your benefit, chances are you'll get hit or you'll notice something funky. Then increase your pause time at that point. But remember, guys, trying to get deeper, use that deeper guy. Shallower water, use that shallow guy. We are looking for fish. Now, a lot of the time, early in the winter, and I'm going to explain this to you too. Imagine the middle of the United States. Let's put an imaginary equator right across the middle of the United States. This is where most of the information comes from. If you live in the northern U.S., chances are you probably have ice on your water right now. And your temperatures are much colder, probably low 40s, upper 30s. I don't even know what it is for you, because I have never been ice fishing, though I've been invited, and I'm probably going to do that soon. If you live in the southern part of the United States, your water temperature right now, it's mid-December. It's probably still in the 60s, some spots even in the 70s. I live in Northern California, and my water around here is ranging from 55 to 50 right now. So a jerkbait, I feel, works really well all the way down to the mid 40s. So keep that in mind. You can get away with a much faster moving bait if your water temperature is probably still in the upper 60s in wintertime. Still in the low 60s, bass are willing to chase things at that point. So that's your jerkbait. And now I want to talk about a couple more reaction style baits that work really well in the wintertime. Lipless crankbaits and blade baits. Now, a lipless crankbait, a little thicker, puts off a little harder vibration, but it does have flat sides. And you're going to hear this about crankbaits in the wintertime when you're throwing. Both of these, I'm focusing on the bottom. That jerkbait was looking at the mid-depth for me. These guys are focused on the bottom. They both have treble hooks on them. If you have a lot of wood around, I'm going to give you another option instead of these guys to try. But you can see I clearly have crawdad patterns right here. Baitfish patterns, bluegill pattern might be more preferable for you. Now, one thing I mentioned is the thinner the bait, you can see that blade bait, ultra thin right there, versus this Fat Vibe by Savage Gear. Thicker, thinner. What's going to work better in the colder water? The blade bait's going to. If you're watered down to about 50 degrees, this is where this guy loses its luster a little bit, but there are some exceptions to that. And this is where this guy starts to excel. If I'm above 50 degrees, I'm probably going to go to a little thicker lipless. Below 50 degrees, you're definitely going to see the blade bait come into play a lot. Now, the same thing when I mention bottom, I'm letting these hit the bottom and I'm yo-yoing them. Just basically a quick lift of the rod tip, letting it fall back down. I'm not going to 12 o'clock and letting it fall back down. Just little rips off the bottom, let it hit, little rip off the bottom, let it hit, little rip off the bottom. They love that in the wintertime. So that can find you those bottom fish. The jerk bait can find you those shallower suspended fish. Now let's talk about fish that are looking down, maybe in the grass, maybe in the timber, suspended off the side of rocks. You have a lot of choices right here. A lot of people talk about a little underspin in the wintertime. Some people use swim jigs. Spinner bait, one of the most underrated wintertime baits. The more stained water you have, the better spinner bait's gonna work. If your water's slightly on the clearer side, an underspin's gonna work. Now, this guy and this guy can both work really well in the mid-depth and dragging on the bottom. Dragging a spinnerbait on the bottom, dragging an underspin on the bottom, both work phenomenally well. If you're hanging up a lot with those lipless baits, the crankbait style bait, this is a great option to slow roll along the bottom. Once again, you could do a crawdad pattern in a spinnerbait. A crawdad pattern in an underspin looks really weird. I don't really think it applies, but the spinnerbait, you can mimic bluegills and crawdads really well. Underspin, I think, is just a bait fishy deal, and these are very, very weedless. So remember that. Keep trying these around, bounce around. I would probably first have on a spinnerbait if my water was stained. If my water is clear, if I can see beyond 4 or 5 foot deep, I'm probably gonna have the underspin on. Now, let's say, and those guys are probably, the underspin and the spinnerbait are probably pretty good around those shallower bodies of water. If you have a lot of timber, a lot of snags, a lot of grass, that's gonna be a better bet. But let's say you get out to, you're fishing a lake that doesn't have a lot of that, and it's a hard, rocky bottom. This right here, that's a 3XD, that's a Strike King 3XD, and this is a wiggle wart. Now, you heard me talk about thinner sides right here. All right, this is the black label right here. Very, very thin crankbait. But you know this works great in cold water, but the wiggle wart historically works really, really well in cold water too, and so does the 3XD. Now, the difference is the 3XD runs very steep and grinds into the bottom, so it's stopping, almost like a jerkbait. It hits, you hesitate, hit, hesitates, and it wobbles really, really nice and erratic, puts off a lot of water movement, going at a slow speed. So there's a contrary, you don't want to use a big deep diver with a wider side on it. A big deep diver in the wintertime, you want flatter sides. And the wiggle wart tends to track really wide and erratically while it's digging, which can cause a lot of great wintertime strikes. But one thing you're going to notice is their smaller profile. They're all in like that 3 to 2 3/4 inch profile size. Those smaller crankbaits tend to work great in the winter because a lot of those juvenile crawdads don't duck into the mud like the adults do, to where those bass are still picking off those smaller crawdads. So here's a little tip, and I've said this in other videos. Those little black ducks you see, the coots, little mud hens, if you ever see 2 or 3 of those guys hanging out, usually there's leftover roots or some soil on the bottom if this is a hard rocky lake, and that can be one of those areas that those little crawdads love to hang out in. So if you see little coots and you know you can touch the bottom, these little crankbaits work phenomenally well right under those guys. All right, so now we went through, we talked about crankbaits, we talked about jerkbaits, we talked about underspin, we talked about a spinnerbait. These are great search options in the winter. They all work great when it's cold, but now we find them. Let's say we're throwing that underspin, boom, we catch one in 3 foot of water. Now, I'm gonna pick up a good old classic stick worm, wacky rig, okay? And then I'm gonna pick up a weedless Ned head right here. What do you think's gonna catch those bass in the wintertime that are in 3 foot of water better? Now, we were swimming something through there. We weren't necessarily dragging the bottom, so maybe that fish is looking forward to where that wacky rig falling slow in that shallow water might trigger them better than a Ned rig being drugged across the bottom, to where, yeah, that good old wacky worm right there, that may be the deal. Now, let's say that was in 10 foot of water, and counting this guy down in 10 foot of water is probably not as efficient as throwing like a Ned rig. Well, you could stick a nail weight in the end of that right there, and it's almost like Neko rigging, but it gets down a little bit faster, kind of like a wacky. Now, you know about the hook configuration right there. On a Neko rig, the hook's hooked out to the side of the worm. I call it Neko, it's Neko. But the hook's hooked out to the side of the worm, but if I'm still using it for wacky, I hook it across the worm like that. If I'm shaking it a lot, I still run the worm hook sideways. If I'm dragging it, I'll do the normal Neko rig configuration. But that gets that down there. So what happens is, now, let's say we know there's no grass there, or that doesn't work. Well, in that 3-foot area, ooh, just poked myself right in the finger there. In that 3 foot of depth area, we don't need a heavy weight. So you look at this little tiny grass Ned head here, and this is the new Savage Gear Salamander Ned. And this thing's unreal. I've smoked them with that. And then you have a traditional TRD. Well, you can see right here, this is like almost a 1/4 ounce head right here. Little heavier gauge wire. If you have a silty bottom, that could get stuck down in the bottom. It could be dragging up a bunch of crap. Versus a grass style right there that can work phenomenally well with a slightly lighter wire hook. This is going to outperform this. This is immediately going to get to the bottom. If you have a hard rocky bottom and we're fishing beyond 10 foot, 15 foot deep, this is going to outperform this. But this guy is going to outperform this guy if it's shallow and silty. So this may be in my top 5 once again, but this should be in your top 5. So once again, it doesn't apply. Now, if I'm catching fish on those lipless baits or a crankbait, I'm probably gonna refish that same spot because I said they school up with guys like this. Now, if I caught them deeper on that underspin or spinnerbait or a crankbait, I'm probably also going to try the good old classic drop shot. Now, I want to tell you another little key about wintertime drop shotting. I always like to use straight worms. If I'm fishing on largemouth water, I love a 4-inch trick worm, wacky rigged right there, hooked right in the middle, and I try to use a 1/4 ounce drop shot weight if I'm fishing beyond 10 foot deep. I'll go a 3/16 if I'm fishing very shallow. But remember, we do need to make longer casts in the wintertime to oftentimes find these fish. But if you've already located them, you can adjust your weight. The lighter the weight, the more natural your worm's going to present too. Easy, tight line, relax line. Tight line, relax line is going to give enough action for that worm. You do never want to hop your weight off the bottom like that. Also, the lighter hook. This is a size 2 light wire hook. When this worm hits, you want it to hesitate. When the drop shot hits on the bottom, you want your worm to go fast and then hesitate to that fall. A heavier hook is going to get you less bites. I've proved this throughout the years. The lighter wire hook, lighter line, I'm using 6-pound fluorocarbon right here, is going to get you way more bites. That's what you want in the wintertime. You want to find them, take your sweet time. Now, that's an exposed hook right there. If you're fishing smallie water or spotted bass water, the nose hooking this worm tends to work better. I don't know exactly why that is. I've seen it day in and day out. No snags, nose hooking it around spotted bass and smallmouth tends to work better. The wacky rig tends to work better around largemouth. I cannot quite wrap my head around that. I think maybe the largemouth maybe thinks it's a crawdad twitching off the bottom. Now, if we're around a ton of timber, a ton of grass, you don't want to throw that exposed hook. Once again, a straight worm, but I'm using a size 1 EWG light wire. This is going to allow me the freedom to throw it around those logs, to throw it around those rocks. Give yourself the comfort. You're always up shallow when you're on the bank, so you are dragging it into heavier cover and heavier structure every time bringing that bait back. So guys, I think I covered a gamut of what you should try out there bank fishing this year. I want you to keep in mind that there is no magic bait. There's application purposes for each one of your lures. So the first thing you need to think of is slow, stop and go, thin sides, bottom contact, or stop and go in the middle of that water column. There is other great options in the wintertime like Alabama rigs, float and fly, a little bit more complicated. It's hard to take an A rig around on the bank, but they also do work really well dragging across the bottom. Float and fly, you can bomb it out there over deeper water, let your little fly get down there and suspend. The A-rig works really well if you have a ton of bait fish in your water. The float and fly works really great if you have vertical walls, spotted bass, and smallmouth in your system. Largemouth do eat them too, but this is all stuff I want you to keep in mind and understand where you're fishing is not necessarily where this person making this video, where you may fish an area that I don't even know what it's like. I've never fished an area like yours, but I want you to use the general science of all this information and how to apply those baits to go about dialing in your system. Remember, the tough days are the most educational days. Try to get that one bite and figure out and think about what happened around that one bite, and it's going to make you a much better fisherman. I'm Nick, the Informative Fisherman. Follow me on all the popular social media channels, guys. Thanks for watching.